On the morning of her 10th birthday, I carried a handmade cake into my daughter's room, singing her favorite song. She didn't smile. Instead, she looked me dead in the eye and said, "I don't want you as my mother anymore. Pack your things and leave." I thought it was just a cruel childhood tantrum until 3 days later, when a massive, unmarked moving truck pulled into my driveway. But those movers weren't there to take my belongings. They were there to unload boxes that contained a secret my late husband had buried years ago, a secret that turned my daughter's words from a heartless insult into a desperate, coded plea for help. If you think you know where this story is going, trust me, you aren't ready for what was inside those boxes. My name is Chloe, and at 28 years old, I've already lived a lifetime's worth of survival. I had my daughter, Bella, when I was just 10 years old in spirit, or so it felt, though legally, I was barely 18 myself. Being a teenage mother in a small town meant my youth ended the moment the line turned blue. While girls my age were worrying about college dorms and weekend parties, I was working double shifts at a local diner, stretching every single dollar to afford diapers, rent, and a decent life for my baby girl. Bella's biological father had walked out the second things got real, leaving me to face the cold, hard world completely alone. For 18 years, Bella was my entire universe. Every sacrifice I made, every extra shift I picked up, and every meal I skipped so she could have brand new clothes, I did it all with a heart full of love. We were a team. It was always Chloe and Bella against the world. So, when her 18th birthday approached, I wanted to throw her a celebration that felt special, even on my modest budget. I spent 3 months saving up to buy her a delicate gold locket, inside of which was a picture of us on her first day of kindergarten. The party was hosted at a local restaurant. But when I arrived, the atmosphere felt completely off. Standing beside Bella was a group of wealthy, polished strangers, the estranged family of her biological father, who had suddenly resurfaced 6 months prior with deep pockets and big promises. When I walked up to give Bella my gift, the room went dead quiet. I handed her the small velvet box, my eyes welling up with happy tears. But Bella didn't smile. She looked at the box, then looked up at me with cold, unfamiliar eyes. In front of her friends, her father's snobbish family, and a room full of guests, she dropped the velvet box right into my open palm. Her voice rang out, harsh and deliberate. "I don't need your fake motherly love or your cheap presents anymore, Chloe. As of today, you are dead to me." A collective gasp echoed through the room. I stood frozen, the humiliation burning through my chest as my own daughter, the girl I had given my entire life for, turned her back on me and walked away. The drive home that night was a blur of blinding headlights and silent tears. Walking back into our small house felt like stepping into a tomb. The silence wasn't just quiet. It was heavy, suffocating, and filled with the ghosts of 18 years of laughter that had suddenly been erased. I collapsed onto the couch, staring at the small velvet box still clutched in my trembling hand. For hours, I sat in the dark asking myself where I had gone wrong. How could a girl I had protected, nurtured, and loved with every ounce of my soul look at me with so much cold detachment? By the next morning, the numbness turned into a hollow ache. I forced myself to walk into Bella's bedroom, half expecting to see her lying there, ready to tell me it was all just a cruel nightmare. But the room was stripped bare. Her closet was empty, her shelves cleared out, as if she had systematically erased her entire existence from my life overnight. As I began cleaning the dust off her nightstand, my foot brushed against something underneath her bed. I knelt down and pulled out a plain white envelope that had been tucked far into the corner, clearly left behind in her rush to pack. My heart hammered against my ribs as I opened it. Inside wasn't a note or an apology. Instead, there was a heavy brass key with an intricate serial number stamped onto its side, and a folded piece of paper bearing the official letterhead of a high-end corporate law firm in Los Angeles. The document was a copy of a legal summons, but several lines had been heavily crossed out with a black marker. Only one phrase remained clearly visible: mandatory compliance for full trust distribution. I stared at the paper, the cold metal key weighing heavily in my hand. Bella had never mentioned a trust fund, nor had she ever interacted with high-powered attorneys. A strange, uneasy sensation began to settle in my chest. As painful as her public rejection had been, looking at this key, I realized my daughter hadn't just walked away, she was keeping a dangerous secret. 2 days passed in a haze of confusion and agonizing silence. By the morning of the third day, I was sitting at my kitchen table, nursing a cold cup of coffee, staring blankly at the brass key. I hadn't slept, unable to piece together why an 18-year-old girl would be dealing with high-powered corporate lawyers. That was when the loud, heavy rumble of a diesel engine rattled my front windows. I pulled back the curtains and froze. Backing into my narrow driveway was a massive, commercial-grade moving truck, the kind used for high-end corporate relocations. Before I could even process what was happening, 2 men in crisp uniforms stepped out of the cab, checked a clipboard, and marched straight up my front porch. I opened the door, my pulse racing. "Chloe?" the head mover asked, his voice businesslike and efficient. "Yes," I stammered, looking past him at the giant steel vehicle blocking my yard. "There must be a mistake. I didn't order any movers." "No mistake, ma'am," he replied, holding out a digital tablet for me to sign. "We have strict instructions to deliver these assets directly to this address, under your name." Before I could object, the movers rolled up the heavy shutter on the back of the truck. Inside sat nearly a dozen massive, heavy wooden crates, each locked tight with reinforced steel bands. I watched in utter disbelief as they began wheeling crate after crate into my small living room, completely filling the space until the house smelled of cedar, heavy tape, and expensive leather. When the last crate was unloaded, the driver handed me a thick manila envelope stamped with a red urgent seal. "Everything inside these crates belongs to you now, legally binding," he said plainly. I stood in the middle of my crowded living room, holding the manifest, staring at the crates. My daughter had disowned me 3 days ago, yet somehow she had just sent a fortune straight to my front door. My hands shook uncontrollably as I grabbed a crowbar from the garage and wedged it beneath the heavy steel bands of the first crate. With a loud snap, the wood gave way, revealing thick padding and a stack of leather-bound binders, private financial statements, and sealed envelopes. I didn't care about the high-value antiques or the sealed metal cases sitting around me. I immediately reached for the thickest binder, labeled with her biological father's full legal name, Richard Sterling. As I flipped through the pages, the terrible truth began to untangle itself right before my eyes. Richard wasn't just a wealthy absentee father who had suddenly felt guilty. He was a cold, calculating man who had built a massive real estate empire through ruthless schemes. But his empire was crumbling under federal tax audits, and he needed a way to shelter millions of dollars from government seizure. 6 months ago, he had approached Bella with a proposition disguised as a father's love. He created a multi-million-dollar irrevocable trust fund in her name. But tucked deep within the legal fine print was a sinister clause inserted by Richard himself. Bella would only receive total legal control of the estate assets on her 18th birthday if she publicly severed all emotional and legal ties with me, proving she had completely abandoned her working-class roots. Richard thought he was using my daughter to hide his dirty money, while simultaneously punishing me for raising her without him. He believed an 18-year-old girl would be so blinded by sudden, extravagant wealth that she would willingly humiliate her mother and hand control of the money back to him under the table. What Richard failed to realize was that Bella was my daughter. She possessed a sharp, quiet intelligence he severely underestimated, and she was already 3 steps ahead of his sick game. Tucked inside the second binder was a handwritten notebook in Bella's familiar script, dated just 2 weeks before her birthday. Reading her words, tears blurred my vision as her entire brilliant, dangerous strategy came to light. Bella had seen through Richard's greed the moment he introduced that cruel disownership clause. She knew that if she refused his terms, Richard would simply hide his assets elsewhere, leaving both of us with nothing while he continued his manipulations. So, she made a choice that required absolute iron willpower. She decided to play the villain. She intentionally put on that cold, heartless performance at the restaurant, reciting the exact lines Richard's legal team had drafted to satisfy the trust's strict compliance conditions. To Richard and his snobbish family, it looked like a triumph of pure greed over maternal love. The moment the party ended, Richard's lawyer signed off on the final paperwork, officially unlocking the multi-million-dollar trust and transferring full, unrestricted ownership of every single asset directly into Bella's legal possession. What Richard never anticipated was the masterstroke Bella had prepared with her own independent legal counsel. The contract dictated that she had to disown me to receive the funds, but once the assets were legally hers, no rule dictated what she could do with them afterward. Within 2 hours of the trust being activated, Bella executed an absolute, irrevocable deed of gift, transferring every house, stock portfolio, and physical crate of wealth straight into my name. She didn't just protect herself, she completely dismantled Richard's empire. By transferring his hidden wealth directly to the woman he had abandoned 19 years ago, Bella legally bankrupted her father's estate scheme, leaving him fully exposed to the federal tax audits with zero assets left to shield his name. The morning after the crates arrived, loud, furious banging echoed against my front door. I looked through the peephole to see Richard, his face red with rage, his expensive suit rumpled, accompanied by 2 frantic-looking corporate attorneys. He had finally realized what had happened to his fortune. I didn't hide, nor did I flinch. I opened the door calmly, holding the official transfer deeds James Mitchell's firm had finalized for me just hours earlier. Richard didn't even pretend to act civilized. "Where is she?" he screamed, trying to force his way past the threshold. "She stole everything. That money was supposed to stay under my control. She's an ungrateful little brat, and so are you." I stood my ground, stepping out onto the porch and closing the door behind me. "You tried to use our daughter as a human shield for your fraud, Richard," I said, my voice steady and icy cold. "You wanted her to destroy me for your entertainment, but instead, she exposed you. Every single dollar you tried to hide is now legally mine. If you take one more step toward this house, I'll hand these financial records directly to the federal investigators who are already looking for you." His lawyers pulled him back, whispering urgently into his ear. Richard stared at me, his eyes wide with a mix of shock and defeat, realizing he had been completely outsmarted by the woman he had abandoned and the daughter he had tried to manipulate. He turned and stormed away, his life's work reduced to ashes. 10 minutes after Richard drove off, a small sedan pulled up to the curb. The door opened and Bella stepped out. She looked exhausted, her posture hesitant, as if waiting to see if I would turn her away. But as she walked toward the porch, the tough exterior vanished, and tears filled her eyes. "Mom," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I am so sorry for what I had to say to you at the restaurant. It broke my heart to hurt you, but it was the only way to break his hold over us forever." I didn't let her finish. I pulled my daughter into my arms, holding her tight as we both sobbed on the porch, finally safe, finally free, and stronger than ever before. In the months that followed, our lives transformed completely. With Richard's fraudulent empire dismantled and the assets legally secured in my name, Bella and I left our small town behind and moved to a beautiful coastside home. But we didn't just spend the money on ourselves. We used a portion of the funds to launch a foundation dedicated to helping young single mothers gain financial independence and legal protection against domestic and economic abuse. Bella is now attending her dream university, studying corporate law so she can continue protecting innocent people from predatory schemes. Looking back at that painful night at the restaurant, I realized that what felt like the ultimate betrayal was actually the ultimate act of love, a young girl willing to bear the weight of public humiliation just to secure her mother's future forever. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Would you have forgiven the public humiliation once you learned the hidden truth behind it? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.